He wore a crown, carved from coral and ivory, feared by his enemies, revered by his people. His word could save or slaughter. But the king who built an empire in gold also buried a secret in blood. They say his final order cursed every heir who followed. But was it vengeance from the gods, or justice from within his own palace? This is the story of the crown that destroyed a dynasty. Power forged in fear. In the thick red earth of 15th century Benin, power did not shift. It was seized through fire, through iron, and a lineage soaked in prophecy. One name began to shape the destiny of an entire empire. He wasn't the first Oba to wear the coral beads, but he would be the last, whose shadow stretched far beyond the throne, beyond the palace walls, beyond time. They called him Edeleyo. The name is buried now, whispered only among old bronze workers, who say their tools once rang differently under his reign. Some say he was born under a red moon. Others say he was carved from something the gods buried too deep. But this much is certain. He didn't inherit the crown. He claimed it. His father's blood still soaked the palace courtyard when he walked barefoot into the royal hall. His older brother's body had not yet cooled, and yet he stood unshaken, demanding loyalty. He did not mourn. He did not hesitate. And from that day forward, he demanded one thing from his people: obedience without pause. Under Edeleyo, the kingdom expanded rapidly. Neighboring lands either bowed or burned. He restructured the royal guards, turning them from ceremonial escorts into a disciplined, silent force. Some say they spoke no words, only moved when he gestured. Markets flourished under heavy taxes. Roads were built from blood and stone. Artisans were commanded to immortalize his image, not just in bronze, but in terracotta, ivory, and flame. To some, he was a visionary, a reformer, a leader sent by the gods to unify the land. But to others, he was something else entirely. One account, found in a Dutch merchant's journal, water-stained and half-burned, records an event that no royal historian mentions. A village near the Ovia River had failed to deliver tribute on the agreed day. Not a week late, not a month, one day. That village does not exist anymore. No descendants, no ruins. Just silence and the echo of an order carried out without mercy. Eyewitnesses say the sky blackened unnaturally that evening. The river turned thick. Children were silenced before they cried. And at the center of it all, Oba Edeleyo sat unmoved, watching flames consume lives like a man watching firewood burn in a hearth. His court grew quiet after that. Advisors spoke only when spoken to. Dignitaries bowed lower than necessary. Even the palace artists began to etch his likeness with subtle alterations. Eyes larger, more unblinking, hands clenched, feet never touching the earth. Was it fear or reverence? Or were the lines between the two always blurred in his reign? Those years brought monuments, roads, armies, but also dreams that spread like infection. Dreams whispered in the back alleys of Benin City. Dreams that didn't fade with the morning sun. Of the Oba's shadow, stretching, shifting, flickering, even when he sat still. His power, undeniable. His rule, absolute. But history never forgets the price of absolutes. So we ask, how does a king go from immortalized to cursed? And more urgently, what did he do that made the ancestors turn their backs? The weight of legacy. The crown of Benin was not made of gold. It was coral, layered, sacred, a living crown passed not just through bloodlines, but through ritual, through silence, and through sacrifice, each bead a prayer carved from the sea, each thread a history knotted tight. When Edeleyo placed it on his head, it was said the skies dimmed for an hour, the palace doors shut on their own, and every statue in the royal courtyard tilted slightly, as if bowing. But those who watched noticed something else. The crown did not sit easily. It slid, shifted, clung, like it was resisting, like it remembered another heir, one who had not been slain. Some say the priest who performed the crowning, a man named Ago, went blind the following week. Others say he wandered into the forest at night and was never seen again. What is documented is that soon after the ceremony, the dreams began. Not just among villagers, but in the palace itself. Servants spoke of coral beads appearing in their beds, slippery, cold. Others claimed to hear the faint sound of waves crashing beneath the stone floors. One guard, young, devout, said he saw the crown levitate above Edeleyo's head as he slept, rotating slowly as if weighing judgment. He was found dead the next morning. No wounds, no marks, just eyes, wide open, mouth filled with seawater. And yet, the Oba himself never acknowledged it. Not once. He wore the crown like skin. He walked with it into court, into council, into war, but never into the temple. Never. Not once during his reign did he set foot inside the ancestral shrine, a place every Oba before him had visited in their first moon cycle as king, a place where the crown was meant to be blessed and surrendered. He kept it, always, even when alone, even when sleeping, even when bathing. He ordered the crown placed on a stone within arm's reach, and that stone, the one he chose, was once part of a gravestone. They say it belonged to the first son of the first Oba, the one who died before the crown was ever completed. Coincidence or confession? Priests grew quiet, festivals faded, and in their place, silence, but not the peaceful kind, the kind that watches you, waits for you, knows you, and the people felt it. Even those far from the palace in the outer villages began to speak differently. Children refused to draw the crown in school carvings. Mothers avoided red beads. Fishermen swore the tides shifted unpredictably, as if some unseen weight was sinking into the sea. The crown itself was never questioned publicly, but behind closed doors in the glow of oil lamps, questions grew, not about the power, but about the price. And still, Edeleyo wore it every day, until it became hard to remember where the man ended and the crown began. So again, we ask, how does a king go from immortalized to cursed? And if the curse didn't come from his enemies, did it come from the very thing he wore? The fatal decision power rarely fades. It fractures, and when it does, it begins from within. Whispers started first, among guards, then priests, then wives, not loud, not treasonous, just questions about the rituals no longer observed, about the offerings ignored, about the ancestors who had grown silent. Edeleyo noticed, but he did not bend. Instead, he called a private gathering. Only 10 were invited. Only 9 returned. The missing one, his eldest son, was never spoken of again. Those who had seen him last said he had challenged the Oba, not with sword, but with memory. He had brought the coral crown, the original, from the shrine, the one Edeleyo had refused to bow to, the one made for the first heir, and he placed it beside the Oba's own. 2 crowns, same shape, different weight. The room fell still. The Oba stood, looked at both, and made his choice. He ordered the original shattered, burned, ground into powder, and thrown into the river. That was the final command. What followed was not rebellion, it was withdrawal. The gods did not strike, the sky did not tear, but the land began to change. Crops failed, twins were born still, priests refused to speak in tongues. And every night, Edeleyo walked the palace halls alone. Servants say they heard him talking, but no one ever responded. They say he began sleeping with his eyes open, that he refused to eat from silver, that he banned mirrors from the palace, not because he feared his face, but because he feared who else might be reflected. The royal scribes stopped recording events, not because they were forbidden, but because there was nothing to record. Time itself seemed to stall. And then, the statues began to weep. Not water, not blood, but oil, thick, black, and cold. First, the statue of his father, then his brother, then one carved in his own likeness. The court said nothing. The priests had vanished, and Edeleyo gave no orders. Until the final day, he summoned the last remaining artisan, an old man, one who had molded his face into bronze over a dozen times, and he asked for one more, but not in bronze, in ash, in wood from a tree that no longer grew, and in silence. No sketches, no measurements, only memory. When the sculpture was done, Edeleyo dismissed the artisan and took the figure into the shrine he had avoided for decades. No one followed, no one dared. Some say lightning struck the palace roof that night. Others say the earth trembled. But most remember only the silence that came after, the kind that doesn't end with dawn. The Oba was never seen again, not dead, not buried, just gone. And the crown? It was found weeks later, floating in the river, untouched, unworn, and heavier than stone. So we ask once more, how does a king go from immortalized to cursed? And was the final command his last act of power, or his first step into punishment? The breaking point. It did not begin with thunder. It did not begin with war. The curse began in whispers. They say the wind changed direction in Benin. It no longer blew from the sea. It circled, trapped, confused, searching. The elders were the first to feel it. Their dreams stopped making sense. Old stories repeated themselves out of order, names forgotten, rituals half remembered, and the fire, the one kept alive in the ancestral square, refused to stay lit. Overnight, the animals left. Goats stopped giving milk, dogs refused to bark, birds vanished entirely. Only crows remained, silent, perched, watching, and the river, the same river that had swallowed the crown, began to swell. Even during dry season, even when the sky stayed clear, it rose slowly at first, then faster, flooding the banks, drowning crops, until one day it reversed direction, flowing backward. The people panicked, but no priest came forward. No ritual was offered, no leader emerged, because there was no king. And without a king, there was no protection. That was when the illness began. It had no name. It didn't rot the skin, didn't burn with fever. It was quiet, private. It stole memory. It blurred time. Fathers forgot their sons. Mothers forgot lullabies. Children forgot how to speak. The marketplace emptied, not from death, but from forgetfulness. No one remembered what they were supposed to sell, or why they had come. It was as if the land itself was unraveling, and in the center of it all, the palace stood untouched. Vines would not grow on it. Rain refused to fall on its roof. Even insects avoided its walls. But at night, light flickered from within. No fire, no lamp, just a pulse. Slow, unnatural, like a heartbeat. There were sightings. Fishermen swore they saw a figure walking the palace gardens at dusk, always alone, always barefoot. wearing the form of the Oba, but with no shadow, no footsteps, no breath, just movement and a sound, like beads, dragging across stone. One woman, old, blind since birth, said she heard chanting beneath her hut every night, voices without language, breath without lungs, and always, before silence returned, a single word: remember. That was the curse. Not destruction, not death, but memory. A memory that would not fade, would not die, the kind that infects, passes from parent to child, from statue to shadow, from silence to song. And when foreign traders arrived decades later, they recorded strange patterns. Children who spoke in old tongues they had never been taught. Stones carved with faces no one could name. And always, always, the presence of something just beyond sight. A coldness in the soil, a heaviness in the air. The sense that someone was still watching, still waiting. So we ask again, how does a king go from immortalized to cursed? And if his final act vanished him from history, why does his story still remain, unwritten but never forgotten? What should never be remembered? They were never meant to be spoken, not aloud, not even in thought. Rituals buried so deep they had no names, passed only through silence and blood. The old priests called them ogide, the closing rites, not for kings, not for men, but for things that had once been both, and neither. Rituals whispered into the bones of statues, inscribed on the inside of masks, kept locked behind shrines with no doors, no keys, only memory. And for centuries they were never touched, until Edeleyo. When the dreams worsened and the river rose and silence became too loud, he turned to what the gods had buried, not for power, but for escape. They say he broke into the sealed room beneath the palace, the one carved from salt and smoke, where the ground was warmer, where nothing grew, and where time stood still. He went alone, but never came back alone. What followed was not a ritual. It was a transaction. Offerings were made, old artifacts removed from shrines, royal beads melted, ivory tusks shattered, and blood, not from enemies, not from rebels, but from within the palace, from those closest to him. It is said the king's final consort was found lying in the palace garden, eyes open, mouth sealed shut, with wax, her hands wrapped around coral, her feet bound in silk, a pose never seen before, a sacrifice never recorded. The wind shifted that night, but it didn't blow. It circled backward, and from that moment on, the Oba began to speak in riddles, not to his people, but to the walls, to the trees, to the sky. His voice, never raised, but always heard, even when he wasn't there. One guard claimed he found the king writing on the inside of his own skin, tiny symbols, unreadable, repeating, covering his arms, his legs, his back, marks that faded when seen, but returned when forgotten. Another servant described waking at night to the smell of fire, only to find the Oba sitting in the center of the courtyard, naked, covered in ash, chanting in a voice that was not his. The chants were never understood, because they were not meant for human ears, but animals fled, pregnancies failed, and the soil beneath the palace turned to glass. Those were the forbidden rituals, not performed to gain power, but to hold on to what was already slipping, to freeze time, to bargain with whatever waited just beyond memory. And in doing so, he opened something that could not be closed, a door, a rift, a name no longer bound by the living. And when he walked through that door, he didn't walk back. He remained in the palace, in the statues, in the river, and in the silence cares to remember his name. So we ask again, how does a king go from immortalized to cursed? And if the rituals were forbidden, what exactly did he awaken? What remains when power fades? The palace still stands, not as it was, not as legend remembers, but as shadow. Cracked walls buried beneath moss, gateways swallowed by earth, and somewhere deep beneath it, stillness. Not the peace of ruins, but the weight of something unfinished. The coral beads were never recovered. Not entirely. Divers have claimed to find fragments near the river mouth. Each one, smooth, but cold, even under the sun. Historians avoid the subject. They speak of Benin's greatness, of art, of empire, of resistance. But when asked about Edeleyo, their mouths still. Eyes shift. Records blur. Some say the pages documenting his reign faded on their own. Ink washed out overnight. Others say new entries still appear, written in unfamiliar hand. On paper no one remembers placing. Stories that contradict each other, that loop, that correct themselves when reread. And always, the crown. Never found. Only glimpsed. Once, in the background of a photograph taken in 1964. A blurred figure standing behind a museum case, barefoot, shadowless. Gone when the next frame was taken. The photo was misplaced, then lost, then burned. In a fire no one recalls starting. The museum has since closed that wing. Visitors complained of strange sounds, beads clinking behind walls, a heartbeat beneath the floor. And somewhere, within the Benin City archives, a sealed box remains, unopened, unlabeled, but always cold to the touch, guarded, without instruction, without key. Just a warning carved into its wood. Do not remember what was never forgotten. That is all that's left. No grave, no monument, only echoes, of footsteps that never fade, of a throne no one sits on, but still feels warm, and a crown that weighs more in memory than it ever did in gold. So now, for the final time, we ask, how does a king go from immortalized to cursed? And if his story remains unspoken, if his name is lost in the dust of time, why do we still feel him, watching? History isn't always written in ink. Sometimes it lingers, in riverbeds, in forgotten names, in the silence between stories. We remember kings by their victories, by their wealth, by their legacy. But some rulers leave behind something else, a presence, a question, a shadow. Oba Edeleyo was never buried, because some legacies refuse to rest, and maybe, just maybe, that's the real curse, not to be remembered, but to never be forgotten. This was the untold rise and fall of the Oba who vanished. If you've made it this far, ask yourself, what part of this story was meant for you to hear? And if you want to hear the next, subscribe. Because some stories will only find you if you're listening.